And it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Mu Yang, who is the director of the Mouse Neurobehavior Core at Columbia University in New York, United States. And she has a very interesting background, in my opinion, because she has experience from two laboratories which have had probably a great influence on the ways we are doing our mouse behavioral phenotyping nowadays. So she was a former graduate student of Robert and Caroline Blanchard, who are well known for their work on introducing ethologically based behavioral assays to the field of preclinical neuropsychiatric research. And then she did her postdoc with Dr. Jacqueline Crawley at NIH, where Mu Yang published extensively on mouse models of neurodevelopmental disorders. And she has pioneered a number of behavioral assays that are based on species-specific behaviors. And in addition to this important and great work, she is also a strong advocate on scientific integrity and data transparency. And actually, I got to know her via former Twitter, but I think the current platform is still useful for sharing information. So now I'm not delaying the presentation anymore, and it's the screen is yours, Mo, please.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and for the lovely introduction. I definitely have a common background coming from the Robert Blanchard's lab, and then did my postdoc at NIH with Jackie Crawley, and now I'm the core director at Columbia. So this topic is very different from most of the talk that you want to, because I haven't been working on this for the past 17 years since I left the Blanchard's lab. So you might be wondering why now, why we're talking about this now. Well, it's because the longer I work in conventional labs with conventional standard modern behavior assays, the more I realize the importance of an ethologically based approach. So the reason why we're talking about this today is because I haven't been looking at hours and hours of video footage. I haven't been using stopwatch to score behavior. I haven't been doing the things I was trained to do when I was in graduate school. So, and then with the current development with AI technology, I think it should make a comeback. It is time that we bring back an ethologically based approach. So a brief introduction. Let me see if I can. So I probably will take most of the time talking. Because we will probably have a lot of Q&A, so I encourage everybody to bring our Q&A to the behavior forum that Vootele just mentioned. Before I go on, so quick review of my scientific career. I went to graduate school in University of Hawaii in the lab of Robert and Caroline Blanchard. And I would say that's where most of my training, the most important part of my training was obtained. And then I went down to work in NIH, and then, fast forward to current days. It's a very quick review of 20 years, but I would say the first 7 years was absolutely critical in terms of shaping my research philosophy, my scientific philosophy. So the topic we're going to go over today, and just so that you know, we will have more questions asked than answered, and then there will be very little data in this talk. It's more of food for thought, it is to encourage everybody to think rather than to give any specific answer to specific questions. So the topic we're going over is, okay, so we start with what's wrong with translational research. It's quite early in the day to get to this, but and then we'll go over commonly used measure of anxiety and what we're missing. And then we zoom into ethologically based measure of anxiety-like behaviors. And then we'll go over the differences between anxiety and fear. And then I'll go over the design process. This is my baby in graduate school. This is an ethologically based measure of anxiety that I came up with my colleagues in Hawaii in the Blanchard's lab. And then I don't think I really told the story about how I came up and how the steps I went through to come up with this essay. And then I think is the AI tool, how I think AI tool could bring back the ethologically based measure of anxiety or behavior in general. So first, what's wrong with translational research? I mean, this is a heated debate that's been going on forever. There's many discussions has been done somewhere else, but I think that the fundamental problem is we're talking about translation. Translational research is translation. What is translation? You got to know both. You can't try to translate Shakespeare to Chinese and then you don't know Chinese. So what you end up is making some comedic noises that sounds like Chinese to you. And then if your audience all don't know Chinese, that might sound like Chinese to them as well. But is that translation? No, absolutely not. It's laughable. But how come we don't quite understand this when it comes to translational research, right? We need to understand human behaviors and we need to understand the species behaviors before we even attempt to make that translation. Second, face validity. This is one of the critical validity for behavior models. It's very commonly accepted. So what's the problem? Well, face validity doesn't mean superficial. Face validity doesn't mean that you look at a behavior, you look like some behavior in humans, and then you call that using the same term as you call the human behavior. That's not what face validity, but unfortunately that becoming the case more and more often. And then next, more pet peeves on labeling and naming behavior. This is related to the first two topics. And how are we naming and labeling behaviors? Are we doing it so that we can easily buy an instrument, get a software, turn on the machine, put the mouse in, and get the data? That's kind of the conventional approach. That's very convenient. You get a lot of data that way. But when you do so, are we also changing how we think about the behaviors? Do we really understand the behavior that we think we're measuring? So examples of labeling behavior: anxiety, this is what we'll be talking about. Depression, don't get us started, right? Sociability, ADHD, what exactly do you measure and what do you exactly mean by that? Cognition, oh, this is a good one. This is a good one. We had a conversation in the behavior forum on what exactly is cognitions in mice. So, okay, now let's move on to anxiety. Now we covered the bigger picture of translational research. Let's go into what do we mean by anxiety-like behaviors? And how do you measure them in your rodent models? So I'll get started on what I see as the most common approach. The first, probably the most popular one, is based on where the animal is. This is probably driven by the popularity of tracking system, or either IR-based or visual tracking systems that can track where the animals is spending its time. Is this part of the maze or that part of the maze? So it's usually time spent in the open arm in the elevated plus maze, or the time spent in the center of the open field, time in the light chamber versus the dark chamber. So is anxiety avoidance? Well, you got to think about it from a pre-animal's perspective. If anything causes the animal to avoid that much, a pre-animal does not have the luxury of spending that much time avoiding. It's going to cost its life. So we're going to think about it how, in terms of from a conceptual level, what do we mean by anxiety? A second one is also very popular, is based on the predictive validity. What is anxiety? Anxiety is whatever is reduced by anxiolytic drugs. How do we test anxiolytic drug? We put in the test of anxiety. Okay, which one, which is which? This is an endless cycle of argument here. So you might be wondering now, so what's our alternative? How else are we supposed to measure anxiety? So I want us to start think about not just some other essays that we can buy a software for. I want us to start thinking about behaviors in terms of its functions, in terms of the context in which this behavior occurs, and in terms of how this behavior benefits the species survivals. So let's think about behavior this way before we try to get another software, get another maze, and get another whatever. All right, so before we move further on, so you can find a lot of elegant writings by Blanchard and Blanchard, go all the way back to the 60s and 70s. And then Carolyn Blanchard is actually still writing to this day. So you can find a lot of literature on this topic. This is just a very quick overview. So now let's move on to anxiety-like behavior from an ethological perspective, which is what I offer as alternative to the avoidance-based measures and then to the whatever is reduced by anxiolytic drugs perspective. So going back to the functions, more often than not, pre-animals encounter a lot of threat in its daily life. Very often it's ambiguous, incomplete, and difficult to locate. It's more often than they encounter real threat. So they need to do a lot of checking and assessment. In the field study, this behavior is usually called vigilance. You see pre-animals constantly scanning the environment, stop, check, sniff, look. These are basically risk assessment behaviors in the field studies. In the lab environment, we call this risk assessment. Typically is lab rodents orienting to the potential threat and exhibiting slow approach and withdrawal behaviors. In the meantime, they will exhibit visual and olfactory scannings. The function, we need to keep emphasizing functions of behavior. The function is to assess the threat and act accordingly, because like we said, avoidance sounds safe, but avoidance is a very extremely costly behavior if you don't know how to operate and assess the threat to be real or not. So if the threat is confirmed, the animal will adapt a more specific defensive behaviors. And then if the threat is not real, the animal will return to normal activities. So we always think about anxiety as something bad, something is something we try to avoid, something we try to reduce. But we can think about anxiety as something like highly functional. It is just a process that pre-animal will encounter, and it's highly beneficial for their survivals. So some keywords here to remember: potential threats, and then the name of the anxiety behavior that you may see in the literature, vigilance and risk assessment in the older literature. So the pioneers and then my icons in this field are Jeffrey Gray and Neil McNaughton. Highly recommend this book. This is probably the most elegant book on anxiety that I've ever read. This is like we spent an entire semester on this in graduate school. And of course, Robert and Carolyn Blanchard, they have a lot of work on anxiety and fear in terms of the causes of functions. So this is a chart we need to go through. It's like, so when we look at, when we think about a fear and anxiety, this is a part we are talking about the context. We really have to talk about the context in which the behavior occurs, because the same behavior can manifest very, very differently depending on the context. So let's look at first the left part of this chart. When the flight is available, so a lion is chasing a zebra in the wild, and it's a far open field, and the lion is still far away. So the zebra's first reaction will probably be like flight, will be running away, because you're able to run away. So that will be your predominant behavior when the threat is distant, but it's real. But when the threat becomes closer, the behavior will manifest as defensive threat and even defensive attack. So when you're like in close encounter with a lion, and sometimes you will see the prey animals exhibit defensive threat and defensive attack. And now the right part of this chart to look at when the flight is not available, when you're blocked. So if you're like, let's say you're in a New York dark alley at night, there's a robber pretty far away. You're blocked in an alley, but you don't know if that person has seen you. The first reaction will be freezing, is to limit your probability of being detected. So the predator might go away if you do not make any moves. And again, when the threat becomes real and very, very close, the predominant behavior will be defensive threat and defensive attack. So I think this is a concept that has been missing from the majority of the current or modern literature, is that what the behavior looks like and how the animal react, even if the animal is experiencing the same emotion, let's just say fear or anxiety, exactly how the behavior looks like will be very different. So which means if we only use a location-based measure, we're missing out a lot. We're only providing a very simplistic context, and then missing out a lot on the detailed analysis on naturalistic behaviors. So what are some of the ethologically based tests for defensive behaviors? So first, I want to introduce to you the mouse defensive test battery. This is for mice. And then we'll have the cat odor test. That's for measuring anxiety in rats. And then the cat exposure test, which is for measuring fear behavior in rats. And then I'll introduce to you the rat exposure test. So this is a mouse defense test battery, or MDTB. So this is a 2 meters long oval runway. Yeah, this is how we run behavior experiments back in the 90s and early 2000s. You hold anesthetized Long Evans rats, and you'll run around a 2 meters runway to chase a mouse. It's a hell lot of fun. So what we're able to see is very beautiful flight behaviors, very beautiful jump escape, defensive aggression, and to some extent risk assessment. But I would say the beauty of this test is really on the flight behavior and then the fear-like behaviors. You do see some defensive aggression, mostly in outbred animals. As you can see, this is an animal when the flight is not available, we start doing defensive. This is jump escape. When the flight is available, the predominant behavior is running away. And this is when the threat becomes extremely close in the animal. This is defensive attack. So the limitations of the MDTB is that it is really not ideal for studying risk assessment, which is, as we know, a measure of anxiety. So inbred mice will sometimes stop and orient to the handheld predator. And this is used as a risk assessment in this assay, but it's really hard when you're huffing and puffing, running around, chasing the mouse and trying to capture the stop and orient behavior, you know, and then calling it out to your friend who's doing the live recording. And it's really difficult to capture that from the video recording as well, because it's overhead camera, the behavior is very subtle. And then this assay really doesn't work for many inbred strains such as 129, and they just don't run. It's miserable to run inbred strain in the MDTB. And then in general, the problem of studying risk assessment in mice is that it's so transient. We all have seen it. Like anybody who has seen video recording of the elevated plasmids have seen the animal exhibit like very quick stretch and pull away, but it's so quick, it's so transient, it's very hard for people without a lot of training to capture that accurately. And again, it is very difficult to measure because the animals doesn't really change the location. So you cannot really use any kind of tracking to do that. The change in posture is so short and so quick. Tracking systems such as NODA's EthoVision doesn't really capture as current as it is, doesn't really capture the changing postures that we call risk assessment. So we need a new test for measuring risk assessment in mice. So going back a little bit, so the drawing board for is what we already worked out for rats. So this is a study where this is a cat odor test. It's basically a long 1 meter long box. It's a clear box that you can look at from the side. And then we have a odor saturated with a block saturated with cat odor. And then we put a long Evans thread on the other end. And then in this assay, the rats will exhibit very beautiful stretcher tend risk assessment behavior. And then they can form conditioning. This is, is strong enough of fear stimuli to elicit conditioning response to the context. But this one doesn't really work. If you put, whether you put cat odor on it or rat odor on it, any kind of predator odor on it, mice don't seem to know what to do. They kind of just run around, and then the attempt to move this to mice are very frustrating. We failed pretty miserably. So we had to come up with something else. Similarly, fear behavior that work beautifully, fear assay that work beautifully for rats also didn't work too well for mice. So yes, back in the days, we have a cat in our lab. It's his name was Blackberry. He has his own vivarium room. We pay per diems, and he works 4 hours a day. So anyway, blackberry. He was our resident predator, and then the rats will exhibit beautiful freezing and fear behavior when we put them in a chamber with a barrier next to the cat. It doesn't really work well for mice. In the same environment, the mice just look confused and scared. The behaviors are just run around. It's very hard to measure or make sense of anything that the mice was doing. So what's the reason? I guess it's very difficult to imagine the mouse is not scared by the cat or the rat. So I guess a possibility is that the mouse is scared, but the setup, meaning that the box or the equipment, the structure is such that it does not allow a clear manifestation of fear and anxiety-like behavior. The animal may be experiencing fear and anxiety, but it doesn't have a place to exhibit that behaviors. So, which means we need some kind of structures in which the mice will exhibit robust risk assessment. The inspiration is home base and shelter. So imagine if you heard something outside your door, outside your house, you will probably go check what's going on, and then you know where to run, right? So you have a very clear, oriented behavior when the threat is near your house, and you know where to hide and where to run. Imagine if we're taking a tour in Times Square and a bomb went up. You have never been to Times Square, you don't know where to go, where to run, and then a bomb went up. Your behavior will probably much more, there will probably no structure, and then you'll probably be running around like the mouse was doing. So I think the structure, the existence of a structure is very critical for the behavior, because this is, again, we're talking about the context specific behavior. So the test we came up with, hi Anna, with Anna, is this is one called the rat exposure test. So the structure is basically, this is a home chamber. Show you a real picture of that. So you see the home chamber is basically a plastic glass chamber with a clear front. And then the unique design is that we have a tunnel built in. The tunnel connects to the surface, and then this is where the animals will be exposed to the rat, and then but they are separated by your barrier, mesh barrier. So the concept is that this is very much like experiencing threat in your house. You know where to hide. This is your front porch. You will go assess what is going on outside. But whether if there's real threat out there, you know where to run, which is back to your home. And then the safe place where this is tunnel provide a shelter in which you can exhibit risk assessment. So that's basically the concept behind the design of this assay. Yeah, so Hannah, I look on the internet everywhere for risk assessment behavior pictures. I really couldn't find any good ones other than in your dissertation. So thank you. That's how ignored risk assessment are. That I really couldn't find any picture after 20 years. The only picture I found was like, oh yeah, that's my colleague's dissertation. That's obviously. So as you can see so this is in a 10 minutes assay. This is a 10 minutes, which is 60 seconds. In 60 seconds, SAP is stretch or 10 posture, which is in 60 seconds, we get 120 seconds of stretch or 10 posture. That's 20% of the time spending in a tunnel in this elongated posture doing this, so this is a very high level of anxiety behavior that you can easily measure because it's so long, and then you can measure using software or manually, and it's so robust. And then we also saw string differences in risk assessment behavior. So very interestingly, we saw this defensive bearing. So if you see, so we put home cage bedding. We put home cage bedding in the chamber. So this will be the mouse home cage soil bedding for at least 3 days. So with the animals, the CD1 and Swiss Webster outbred mice, what they did is they start pushing the bedding to block the tunnel, which is a highly efficient, ingenious defensive behavior. It's just, if you cannot see me, I'm not here. So I think this is very similar to barricading your doors when there's threat outside is exactly what people do. So you see this behavior is very, very strong in outbred mice. So the differences between outbred mice and inbred mice are outbred has a more wild animal component, and inbred mice have gone through many generations of inbreeding, are much more docile. So I guess the Swiss and CD1 are the wilder animals. So we saw this very interesting string differences in risk assessment, defensive behavior. I think this is so far the most robust level of risk assessment that we have been able to see in any existing mouse model of anxiety. So, and then this assay has been adapted by Cornelis Gross at EMBO, and he published quite a few high-profile studies, and then he changed it into shock, aggressive, conspecific, or predator. So meaning that the same setup, you can adapt it to changing to different kind of threat. So anyway, okay, so now why risk assessment has largely been forgotten and why we want it back. So everybody hates manual scoring. We look at the VHS tapes. Many people here probably have never seen VHS tapes. We look at ours and our VHS tapes and CDs. We did a lot of manual scorings. And it is very, very time consuming. It is extremely tedious, and it requires a lot of training and practice. This is not something that most lab wants to do, even core. I don't do it in the core. I don't have the manpower to be able to do that. It's just something that is in the bygone days, pretty much. Or in the European countries. I think you guys still do that. In America, we don't do that anymore. And automated systems are designed to measure location, duration, latency, and frequencies, the where and how frequent and when and all that stuff. So they're not designed to detect postural changes, which is what risk assessment is. And you can see that from Hannah's drawing here, the animal's feet are in one spot. The feet are not moving forward. The body and neck and head are stretched forward, like in a very low posture. So if you look at the location, you can barely detect any changes. And then very often the animal will pull back, and so it's like stretch your tent, and then often followed by a withdrawal. Sometimes the animal will move forward, but very often it will pull back, meaning that the entire behavior is a postural change. It is not a location change. So, for probably from the early 2000s and to recently, I think the technology doesn't really allow for meaningful measure of risk assessment. But I think now with a fast development of AI-based system, I think it is going to be possible. I'm not saying it is done by anybody, but I think with the existing technology and with the fast development of existing technologies, I want to make a plea, so to speak, that it is time to bring back risk assessment. I believe the video recording and then the AI technology should be up to speed to be able to capture postures in change. So now you're going to wonder, okay, you talk about the fear behavior and anxiety behavior in the ethologically based assays, and why you're talking about we should bring back anxiety measures. How about fears? Why we're not bringing that back? Here's a problem. So the mouse defensive test battery is based on was designed based on behavior of real mice or house mice, or New York City mice, the real mice. It was very successful in wild bred strains such like as CD1 Swiss Webster. They have very beautiful flight and fight behaviors. Inbred mice really not so good. Inbred strain just not, they just don't really exhibit the fight and flight nearly as much as outbred animals. So this is a situation where the assay may not be the problem, the animal may be the problem. So if we're stuck working with mostly inbred animals, I am not sure bringing back the ethologically based fight and flight behavior will be very productive. I mean, we still have freezing, which is okay, but in terms of fight and flight, it's not so. It's really not. I cannot really see a way of bringing back fight and flight behavior in a lab animal, lab mice. So okay, so just a very quick origin. What's the difference between inbred and outbred? So the inbred animals were from Far East and so England and Asia. We have this like pocket pet animals. They were bred for beautiful coat color, and then they were extremely docile. So that was the origin of inbred animals. So they were bred to be docile, and then which means that we deliberately bred out the fight and flight behavior. So it's kind of counterintuitive to try to study fight and flight behavior from animal that such feature has been bred out. Yeah, I'm gonna skip that. So take home message. I think again, like I said, this talk will be we had more questions raised than answered. And I'm not trying to tell you that you should go back and then annihilate all your plasmids and an open field and light dark. No, after this talk, I will still go back and tell people to measure percent time on the open arm as a measure of anxiety-like behavior in the elevated plasmids. Because it is quick, it's standard, and then nobody wants to spend an hour like you guys to hear me rumble about this old school nonsense, right? Thank you for your patience, but most people don't have this kind of patience. So really we want to look at behavior in terms of species specific, context appropriate, context. What is the context in which this behavior is being looked at? And then translational value, like before we keep arguing about translational research is in crisis, let's think about how much time we actually spend on studying animal behaviors before we're blaming this and that about the crisis on translational research. And then more stuff to think about is like the differences between anxiety and fear. Think about it in terms of context and cause, function, and then the forms. So I think this is pretty much what I have. It's pretty much perfect at 50. So I guess I still have some time for Q&A. Or do it, yeah. Vootele, that's good?
Yeah. Yeah, you can still continue for a couple of minutes also.
Okay, so let's throw in a little bit because we talk about labeling behavior. We talk about labeling behavior based on what we think the behavior is, rather than based on what we understand what the behavior is. Let's bring okay. So let's criticize this one. Yes, I know I wrote that manual 15 years ago. So let's criticize this paper that I wrote. Not about the paper, about the essays. So this is a very commonly used essay for I think I don't know how many animal model of autism have used these assays, probably in the thousands, if not more. I'm not sure. It is extremely popular test for and for autism-like behaviors in mice. So the design, for people who don't know, it's a 3-chamber. There's a neutral chamber function as starting point. On one side, you have a novel mouse. On the other side, you have a novel cub. So the idea is that the animal with normal social behavior will spend more time with a novel mouse. And then the animal with autism-like phenotype will not spend more time with a novel mouse, or will spend more time with a novel object. So this is a concept. It sounds very straightforward. The inspiration is by watching kids on the playground, whether they play with other kids or whether they play with toys by themselves. So this is a example of thinking what human behavior looks like and then translate that to animals. This is by Jackie Crawley and then Cheryl Moy at the before I joined NIH. So what's wrong with it? So let's think about the family structure of house mouse. House mouse are territorial animals, especially males. Adult males usually have multiple female partners, and then they probably each will have litters at some point. So it's very much a male dominant territory for each family territory. There's no such thing as 2 male mice hanging out. They don't really tolerate each other in the same territory. In this aspect is very different from rats. In rats colonies, you have the dominant animals and subordinate males and females. In mice, it's pretty much one male adult and a female, and then their offsprings. So ethologically, this male friendship it's not functional, and is really not beneficial. It's not a thing. It's definitely occur, but it's by no means some kind of normal social behavior that they do a lot. So, but most study on mouse model of autism use adult male mice in this test. So we're basically looking at adult male mice approaching another adult male mouse and call it a normal social behavior. The lack of such behavior is labeled autism-like behaviors. I published a lot, 20 some papers, more than 20 papers on this, and then now I went rogue and I decided to think about it and then criticize it. So is that some kind of social behavior? Yes. But is that a behavior relevant to studying autism? We had to think about this because, we had to understand first the human as a social being and mouse as a species, how their social behavior differ before we arbitrarily put this behavior together and saying that this behavior is analogous to that behavior, or this behavior is a model of that behavior. So, so this is a you know, like Vootele said, I'm very into transparency and constructive criticism. So now we criticize our own essays. It's not my essays, but I did publish a lot of papers on it. So is that a good time to start? I think it's probably yes. So yeah, so this is just an example to show that we need to think more in terms of how much we understand the species, the model species behavior before we start to translate things we don't really understand. Okay, I'm gonna